Hello and welcome to Watchmen One Page at a Time, where we will be discussing and analyzing Watchmen one page at a time. Now, of course, the whole book is on the table here, but we will be using the one page as kind of an anchor point here. I'm your host, Bobby. Today I'm joined by my good friend, Nicholas. Say something, Nicholas.
Hey. Yeah. Well, hey. I knew what to do before you got there. Well, hello. So, like he said, my name's Nick. I would call myself about a 0.75 of Bobby in terms of familiarity with Watchmen.
So, Nick, how would you describe your level of familiarity with the book?
I would call myself a 0.75 in terms of familiarity. Because like I've read the book, I've watched the movie a couple of times, I read the book again, I've talked a lot about it, but I haven't like watched the show, read the new DC comics, and I haven't like sat down and really analyzed the book beyond the conversations I've had with you and other people.
Fair enough. For the audience, to describe my level of familiarity with it is, I picked it up in high school after seeing the motion comic, after hearing about it, because I wanted to get into comics. Saw the motion comic, got the book as soon as I saw it, read through it several times, attempted to write my AP Lit essay about it, failed. Did not pass that test for record, but I have read this book over more times than I think I've consumed any piece of media, short of, say, maybe like Sly Cooper or like some random YouTube video. So that's where we are. I actually also have not really consumed much of the expanded media. As far as I am concerned, the book and the TV show are the only things that exist.
Okay, interesting. We'll do that in season 2, Watchmen one episode at a time, I think.
All right, Watchmen one line at a time.
Yeah, one frame at a
time. Frame by frame analysis.
Yeah. So in this frame, Rorschach's still eating a sandwich.
Right.
I'm getting kind of hungry.
Anyway. So we should probably begin with an actual like summary of the page. Though since this is page 1, I do feel like we should go over both the cover and the just.
I was gonna say, like, there's a front material.
Yeah, I think that the front material, such as like the foreword and the clock and imagery and things like that, like the additional supplements in the big book are probably going to be their own episode. Possibly later down the line. But I do want to talk about the cover here because it just transitions seamlessly into the beginning of the page itself.
So, when you say the cover here, are you talking about the chapter, or are you talking about like the big like the incredible zoom in on the button?
So, if you aren't aware already, each of the chapters was released individually as an issue at the time.
I see. So we're talking about the mid zoom in on the button with the blood.
No, I actually am talking about the release that most people will get nowadays, which is the big book that contains all 12 chapters. That starts with an ultra zoom in of the button.
Okay.
Pure yellow blood stain going down.
Yeah,
with
and then like the eye. Okay.
The eye. Which is, to me, very like striking. I really liked this cover. This cover makes no sense if you don't know what Watchmen is.
It's actually kind of a terrible cover. Like this is the Watchmen equivalent of like showing Darth Maul with the double saber in the trailer.
That's fair.
which is like, oh, okay. What does this mean?
Now, it is like what the book is about. Like this symbol is what the book is. But it is definitely like there's a reason that every Barnes and Nobles has it with the binder showing, not the not the cover.
Yeah. And like, to your credit, it's very striking. Yellow and red, it's good colors for that. Color theory, whatever. And I want to say that like even graphic novel design nowadays like leans towards like very muted colors. And so having a cover that's like basically pure yellow, it does grab the eye. And I feel like Watchmen has also hit that status where it's like it's hard to be someone who goes into Barnes and Noble and doesn't know about Watchmen.
Yeah.
And doesn't recognize the iconography.
Yeah, Barnes and Noble's comic section at least.
Yeah. And so like you almost get into this weird thing where it's like you don't need to advertise the story itself. You need to advertise the ability to get the story through legitimate means.
Yeah, it's definitely a cover for people who already know what it is.
Yeah.
Or have some idea of what it is. But I think it's also incredible how it transitions. Like, something that I wasn't really thinking about until starting this is that it goes from this ultra zoom in, and it does a zoom out, which, spoiler alert, for page 1.
Yeah.
The whole thing is like a slow zoom out. So it's going from this like ultra close up to a zoom out to the chapter 1 cover.
This is something I forget where I learned this. It might even be a Nostalgia Critic, but like Alan Moore sat down, the writer for the comic sat down and like wrote out an actual description of what he wanted each panel to look like. And I'm sure that the artist contributed like a lot of, hey, that's stupid. Because as far as I know, Alan Moore wasn't an artist.
He wasn't typically. He might have. I think he did art for some stuff. I would need to actually do more research into this. Fake fan, I know. But that's that. I feel like that's going to be a running gag for this fake fan. Anytime there's something I don't know about the creation of it, it's like
you
fake fan.
Yeah. This is okay. Yeah. So bonus content is going to be me talking about my Muppets Watchmen adaptation. But and so like I feel like it's worth kind of saying like you do have to look at each of these panels as way more intentional than even normal like comic book art.
And this is something that Alan Moore does like for most of his books. He has a very much attention to detail like that. But of the Alan Moore books that I have said, and maybe some people disagree with me, I think like Dave Gibbons was the only one that really like went with that vision. Dave Gibbons being the illustrator, for those who don't know, because it's known as a Moore book. But consuming this book over and over again and admiring the art, this is just as much a Gibbons book as it is as a Moore book.
Yeah, and like that's the thing. Like Alan Moore can do all of his like, I want it to be like a slow camera zoom out from the comedian's happy face button. But like it takes an actual artist to translate those words into, something. I always have this thing where it's like people want to describe images as iconic, but then they don't consider whether or not the image itself is iconic, or if the image has just been attached to something, which is important in our society. So like I don't want to say something as iconic as the comedian's button when it's like that's just a smiley face, bud. That's just a smiley face.
It's a smiley face, but I will say the smiley face stumped me for a bit, and then I heard some recent analysis of it that I was like, fucking of course, with the smiley face. And I think we'll get into that once we get into the proper analysis section. We're still on the covers technically.
Yeah, but so in summary, you have the external cover, which is a mega zoom in on like literally just the blood splatter, the eye, and the yellow of the button.
And that's
you have the chapter cover.
Yes, the chapter cover,
which is most of the button, so that you see the whole face, still the blood splatter, and then you see like like very red
The
blood.
blood, yeah, with like chunks in it too, or something like that. Like the
Yeah, I would even
dirt,
argue
I
that
think,
like
is what
it's
it
hard to
says.
tell that it's blood at this point.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
And
Um,
then and then like the actual page that we're talking about today starts with like you zoom out and like now you have the context of all of this is blood running into the gutter
yeah,
over the comedian's button. You see a sort of like doomsayer with like classic "end is nigh"
which
sign walking by, someone cleaning up the blood with a hose, and then you zoom even further out until you can see a broken window with a detective looking out of it, doing the
mhm,
classic like, you know,
mhm.
well, it looks like he went for a short trip, but a long fall.
I've got words
Yeah.
about that when we get to that. I've got something that I noticed with it just before we started this call that I'm like, yep, that is classic Watchmen with that
Yeah.
particular panel.
Yeah.
Um,
But
but
just so that we have like an overview of what we're actually talking
yeah,
about.
yeah, and we'll go panel by panel here. Like we're
Yeah.
not. This isn't just a brief summary. When I say summary, we're going to
Oh, we're gonna spend
we're
an hour per page, and that's not a goal. That is a reassurance.
we are the summary itself. We are not. This isn't like. This is going to be a really long bootleg of Watchmen because we are going to
Yeah.
describe every panel. I don't know if we're going to get super into detail. We'll probably get into detail as we analyze
Yeah.
things. Um, really, it's more to just be like, hey, this is the picture, this is the text, because we're going to read all the text.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Oh, I figure. I
yeah,
like for the sake of conversation,
yeah,
it's good. Like if we're talking about like how the camera moves in Watchmen,
yeah.
yeah, we should probably talk about like how all the
We should probably actually get to the page. There's more I want to say
yeah
about the chapter cover, but we should probably actually describe the
yeah
page.
yeah.
Or go through the full page. So
Well, that's what I just did,
you went through the
asshole.
pictures, but I think we should go through the whole text of it
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Proper starting the actual format.
Well,
Um,
I'm sorry to use a slur so early in the
uh-huh.
production, Bobby, but as an actor, do you want to go ahead and give us the most famous monologue in media,
Right.
and then also the next three panels?
Yeah, but you're gonna give us the detective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
All right. So we have our first panel here. It's that continuing that zoom out. You can see the button, the blood on the curb, and then in the yellow text with the torn journal, it's the Rorschach's journal, October 12th, 1985. Dog carcass in alley this morning. Tire tread on burst stomach. The city is afraid of me. I have seen its true face. And then we continue to zoom out. We can see someone's feet. It says, the streets are extended gutters, and the gutters are full of blood, and when the drains finally scab over, all the vermin will drown. Next panel, we zoom out a little bit farther. We can see Kovacs and a guy hosing the blood. The accumulated filth of all their sex and murder will foam up about their waists, and all the whores and politicians will look up and shout, save us. And I'll look down and whisper, no. Continuing to zoom out, figures are hard to see now, says, they had a choice, all of them. They could have followed in the footsteps of good men like my father or President Truman, decent men who believed in a day's work for a day's pay. Continuing to zoom out. Instead, they followed the droppings of lechers and communists and didn't realize that the trail led over a precipice until it was too late. Don't tell me they didn't have a choice. Continuing to zoom out, we can actually see someone's hand in the frame now, continuing the narration. Now the whole world stands on the brink, staring down into bloody hell. All those liberals and intellectuals and smooth talkers, and all of a sudden, nobody can think of anything to say. And then we get break with the format with the 3-panel wide shot of a detective looking down onto the street, saying,
Yeah. That's quite a drop. Bold on the drop. And the hand is clearly his from the last panel, and we're looking down not just on the blood splatter, which at this point is like I like,
it's like
hardly even remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
And the actual focus of the frame, I would argue, is like you've got a 4-lane road and an intersection near the top.
You know, you say that, and I'm like, you know what? What happens when you break it up as it would be normally? And it's like on the left, you just have the road, middle is just the building, and then the right is just the detective, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. And like the blood splatter is almost like a, in case you missed it moment.
Right. Yeah, you can still see the blood spatter through all of this. It's just like it is definitely like just a speck on the page at some point.
Which
Bigger speck
to
than
really
people,
engage
but...
in some like freshman analysis here,
Mm-hmm.
how small it is the comedian really.
Right. Well, his blood is bigger than most people on the street at the very least. Which, to further the freshman level analysis, might say that his death means more than a single person on the street.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it kind of does in the context of the story.
Yeah. In the context of this is when we turn the camera on.
So, I said I wanted to talk a little bit more about the chapter 1 cover. To kind of continue from what we were saying about how the cover's striking. It's not a very good cover for like getting someone into it.
Yeah.
The original cover, I think, is the same idea, but it is good for getting someone into it. Because you see in place of where it says chapter 1, it would say Watchmen on the in the same font, same color. It would just say Watchmen instead.
Yeah. And I'm guessing it would have like the classic little box in the corner that's like, hey, DC Comics, issue
Comics,
1.
Yeah. Still has the clock too, interestingly.
Yeah.
But you can see you get the badge with the blood running over. That is like, and it's important to keep in mind in the 80s too, like these covers didn't really exist in the 80s.
Yeah.
This wasn't the kind of thing you would see for like a comic book.
This is definitely still in the era of like animation is only for kids, comic book is only for basement dwellers, video games are only for hairy nerds. And we could go into hours about the effects of that, but even still, like actually walking by a comic and seeing something that looks like a work of art in a way that would be recognizable to someone outside of the subculture. Is huge.
Yeah, definitely. And to touch on what I was saying earlier, to finish that thought about what I've heard about the iconography of the smiley face with the blood stain on it. It's something that bugged me for a while because I didn't quite get what the smiley face was really about. And then what I heard was basically like it is, it's cartoonish. It's meant to be kind of just silly. It's very simple. And cartoonish is like the big thing for me. And it's stained with blood. Which is kind of what this comic is supposed to be. Like this comic about comics is supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be about like something that's normally seen as silly and simple, or cartoonish and simple, as a little darker.
Yeah, I mean, to really just stick my foot in it, right? Alan Moore was a wizard who was trying to end America by casting a spell. And Watchmen was that spell. And I think it's not a mistake that it's a comic. It is, he was a comics book writer, but like on top of that, he was very much taking on the idea of Superman as like a icon of the American people. And kind of going like, okay, listen, man, if Superman was real, we would have sent him to Vietnam.
He's got some stuff. I mean, he's the one that wrote the story about like Superman getting the black mercy on him and seeing himself. So he's got positive things to say about Superman too, and that's something that that same analysis video also helped me understand something in regards to that aspect of even within Watchmen.
Alan Moore doesn't hate comics, and Alan Moore doesn't hate like superheroes.
Alan Moore loves comics.
Yeah,
but I mean, he wrote the best one.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
you could fight me on that.
I mean, at this point, can you even argue that?
That's a call to the audience, to be clear.
Yeah, right. Like, well, no, but like, I'm making it worse because like. I would challenge someone to name a comic that has the legacy of Watchmen
Mm.
that isn't also tainted by someone being able to go, oh, you mean the show? You mean the show, The Walking Dead? There's a
Right.
comic?
Yeah, yeah. 'Cause, yeah.
I'm sure there's other examples, but I'm actually kind of sitting here thinking like, okay, I guess you could make an argument that like the there's a lot of comics that have been adapted into movies,
Mm, mm.
like Civil War. But like even then, like I feel like most people would argue that it's like, Marvel Civil War was just okay.
Mm.
Um, and then the movie came out, and everyone knows about the movie, and then a bunch of people read the comic
As far as I
and
understand,
decided that it wasn't the movie.
yeah, as far as I understand, most of the MCU isn't even like really an adaptation of any Marvel story.
Oh yeah, no,
But
it's an
yeah,
adaptation of like someone's idea of it, but
yeah,
that's
exactly.
neither here nor there.
Yeah. Um.
I'm glad that never happened to Watchmen.
Right. That never happened. You know, as far
Yeah,
as I'm aware, it doesn't exist.
yeah, right.
It may exist eventually with the animated movie, but
Hmm.
we'll see with that. We'll discuss that when it comes out as its own
Yeah,
thing. Um, just to kind of wrap up stray thoughts before we really get into this. I said
yeah,
I had some words about the detectives like classic like that's quite a drop.
yeah, right.
Um, so the book overall does this thing where like there's a lot of moments where a character is narrating or saying something over like a flashback, or at least you're
Hmm.
seeing it
Hmm.
as a flashback in there.
Yeah,
And a lot of the times it's just kind of like a pun essentially.
yeah.
And that's what this actually is,
Hmm.
because taking you to the 80s, you haven't seen a story like this. I don't know if Punisher's been out yet, but maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. Maybe he's
Hmm.
just a
Hmm.
word on the lips of your friend
Yeah,
Kyle, whose
yeah.
mom lets him read whatever he wants. Uh,
It's just a twinkle in Rob Liefeld's eye as he draws yet another man with massive breasts.
right. So you're in that state, and you pick up this comic and you read this text, this stuff from Rorschach, hating
Yeah,
the liberals, saying stuff about a dead dog carcass, all this weird shit, and
there's blood everywhere.
then the detective says that's quite a drop.
Yeah, yeah,
Like that's the pun with it as I see it. Like
yeah. Anthony
what a way
Fantano
to
here.
start us off here.
Yeah, yeah, and
Mhm,
that's actually something I was just thinking about. Is like you can look at this from the perspective of like what does this mean today? But it's even interesting to think about like I don't know how far we are from the Hayes Code.
mhm,
But like we're fresh out of the Hayes Code. People are just starting to experiment with this medium in a way that they like legally couldn't
mhm,
before. And you have this comic where the cover is a whole bunch of blood.
mhm,
Um, and then it's like the opening monologue is politics, it's sex, it's violence. Um, and then you have this schmuck who's dropping NCIS
Who's
lines.
balding?
Who's balding. They didn't let you show that in the Hayes Code. That would
Right.
embarrass people. Scandalous.
Right. But yeah. All right. So I have another thought, but since there's been no stray thought leading into it, I want to actually pass it over to you. Where do you want to start with this?
I mean, I think that so like I think that there's a couple of things you could talk about with like each individual panel, but I think a lot of it's going to end up getting covered anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you can talk about like recurring characters with Watchmen, you can talk about outfit design, you can talk about like you just introduce him as Kovacs. I mentioned like there's a
Yeah.
Doomsayer, and like you can talk about like all the differing identities of
Mm-hmm.
Rorschach. But the thing that I find really interesting is that like I called it the most famous monologue, and that's a little bit of a lie, but I find it really interesting that you have the top three panels from Rorschach's journal,
Mm.
that has the classic like, ah, everyone's gonna regret not being me monologue, and then you have like an actual like political thing afterwards about President Truman and following in the good in the footsteps of good men and stuff like that. Um, and it's interesting because I think it's one of the damages that was done to Rorschach's character over time. But it's also just like it's interesting that we chose to cut the monologue there. It's a super hard line. Don't get me wrong. And I'll look down and whisper no.
Yeah.
But I also feel like if you know Alan Moore, if you know Watchmen, now the whole world stands on the brink, staring down into bloody hell, all those liberals and intellectuals and smooth talkers, and all of a sudden no one can think of anything to say. When you're talking about, Vietnam being one of the first wars that was televised, when you're talking about the rise of televangelism, when you're talking about like sort of the return of yellow journalism, I think it's really interesting that we have what, come to think of it, is like a very prescient monologue about like the way that propaganda works. And we cut out that bit and we just talk about the, like, today we just talk about Rorschach is a upset young man who does violence about it.
Oh, and we'll get into that eventually.
Yeah.
Eventually, we've got like
there's
another.
Going to be some. There's going to be some random panel in the next 500 pages that's just like a shot of like some dead person. And we're going to be like, let's talk about Rorschach.
Right. We're gonna be here and we're gonna be like, let's talk about Dr. Manhattan or whatever. Yeah. I don't see that with this page, but we're at least gonna probably talk about Comedian. We'll see. We'll see. But also something that I'm noticing here is all of a sudden nobody has anything to say. Cut to Detective being Captain Obvious / making a meta joke.
Yeah.
like in a way that is kind of nothing to say. Yeah. I mean, the Captain Obvious is definitely the Captain Obvious interpretation of it is nothing to say. Like, yeah, that's quite a drop. Like, yeah, anyone looking out of there could tell.
It's interesting because it's sort of a King of the Hill moment where the detective is basically doing the equivalent of looking down and going, "Yep,
yep."
But I'm going to press this forward, even though I don't necessarily believe in this. I think that there's also an underlying humanity to a lot of Alan Moore's work, where it's like, yeah, there's these big, powerful Vite types, and there's these comedian types who are like very painfully aware of the situation they're in. But there's also just a lot of people who are trying to sell newspapers.
Right.
And whoever you are, in that situation, you do still have an opinion. You do still have a perspective. And maybe your voice isn't amplified in the same way that these, intellectuals are. But that doesn't mean you're not worth committing to paper.
It's also, you could even say that it's the first case against Rorschach being wrong. Because, or at least Rorschach believing stuff that isn't true. Nobody has anything to say. Next panel, someone says something.
Yeah. Because, to be clear, I would argue that a lot of the point of Watchmen is that, like, Rorschach's kind of a dick.
Yeah, Rorschach is Rorschach. But also, so panel 1, who the fuck is Rorschach?
Yeah.
You pick this up, and let's say you have a higher level of familiarity with, like, psychotherapists.
Right. Yeah.
And you see something that says Rorschach's Journal, October 12th, 1985, and you're like, what the fuck is, like, Rorschach doing about this?
Yeah, Fallout New Vegas isn't coming out for decades. No one knows about what a Rorschach is.
That's fair. You know what? The internet hasn't been around, but I mean, like the Rorschaching plot is so like
Yeah.
people
Oh
know.
no,
There's
no,
some people
totally
that know
fair.
this.
Just yeah.
So I'm not sure what angle I'm trying to get at with this. I'm just like, you don't
Well,
know who
it's
this guy is.
yeah. You don't have a perspective on Rorschach outside of this monologue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like I think that a lot of the things that Rorschach will do later in the comic will either dispose you towards agreeing with him because you think he's cool for doing the violence, or will dispose you against him because he is not a good person. Um, but the very first thing you're presented with is, oh, he is like a parody of a conservative of the time. And he also has like very strong anti-elite sentiment in a way that probably wasn't, abnormal for the time.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, to see it phrased so explicitly is rare. I don't know if I would say even today, but like it's rare to see someone in politics to say that like news anchors.
Mm-hmm. I think the thing that I'm getting stuck on with this first one is like, what's going through your mind as a new reader when you say you have no context for this, like you would in the 80s? What's going through your mind when you see that this is supposedly text from the psychotherapist Rorschach?
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that Rorschach was a person in real life.
Well, I'm pretty sure it was like, because I'm gonna double check
but
this
I
to
think
make
that's a
sure I'm not
reasonable
stupid.
assumption to make. Yeah, I
But
think that's a reasonable assumption to make.
yeah, the Rorschach test.
But yeah, you pick up this book. You're like, damn, cool blood on the cover, and you look at the first panel, and that's not. I don't think that's how people actually read comics. But you look at the first panel and you're like, okay, so some guy named Rorschach saw a dead dog. That's sad.
And says that the city is afraid of him. The city is afraid of the guy that made the ink blot test.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm not sure what kind of angle
Disco
I'm trying to
Elysium.
get with this. I'm just like
Disco
that's
Elysium. Come to think of it, actually Disco Elysium. Okay, so like if you want to like go hyper into it on the first panel, this is a very strong statement that like, hey, this dude named Rorschach, wink, says that people are afraid of him, wink. Rorschach is self-knowledge, wink. People are afraid of self-knowledge, wink. This is going to be a comic book about comic books, wink.
And yeah, I see that with the Rorschach wink. Like, what do you see in this?
Yeah, yeah.
Because that is another like kind of layer to it of just a question of like, what do you see about? How do you think the story ends? Do you think that newspaper publishes his journal, or do you think because of the way that newspaper has been characterized, they don't publish shit?
Yeah. All right.
I'm double checking when Watchmen was released because we're going into it. I want to see like the significance of the date because I'm pretty sure the book was released in '85, but I want to double check that.
So the new edition, which is what I have, original color was in '86.
Created by writer Alan Moore and artist David Gibbons, first appeared in the 1985 issue of DC Spotlight. Let's see here. Let's read up on this. We're gonna read Wikipedia for a second. This is the read Wikipedia section of the analysis.
This is the
Let's see here.
I'm gonna be entirely real with you. I for whatever reason I had it in my head talking about this panel that Watchmen was published in '85, and I am now realizing that is not the case.
So they acquired the Charlton characters in 1983, which, for those that don't know, the characters of Watchmen are based on characters from the Charlton comics, which DC acquired. Characters such as Blue Beetle, Captain Atom. I'm trying to think.
Blue Beetle.
Yeah, Blue Beetle.
Really?
Yes, Blue Beetle. I'm going to double check this, but
that Blue Beetle, like Mexican kid
now,
Blue Beetle?
They changed it. So DC lore, there's 2 Blue Beetles. There is the Blue Beetle that you are talking about.
Is one of them a psychopath?
The other one was the predecessor to him. And the way that DC has the lore as it is right now, and this is kind of in line with how he was as a Charlton character. He did not have the Beetle. He did not have that thing. He was just like a tech superhero.
Okay, so Captain Atom would be Dr. Manhattan.
Captain Adam's Dr. Manhattan, and the
Blue Beetle would be Night Owl.
Blue Beetle would be Night Owl. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Then,
sorry, I was just that's
Blue
Beetle?
The deal. Blue Beetle just had like a bunch of tech that was Blue Beetle themed.
Yeah.
And then when DC acquired them and wanted to make their own Blue Beetle, they put in some lore about how he had the scarab, which is
with the powers of Egypt fetish.
But he couldn't like use the scarab or anything, so he just had it in his possession and studied it.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to. The Question was the other one, who is Rorschach, and who most people only know Question from the Justice League animated series, and if you've seen that, you know that Question is goated. Who also has the gimmick of like you can't see his face.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see who the other ones were.
Sitting my ass down and listening because I have not read the comics. But point being, a lot of the Watchmen characters that we're going to see later in the book are from like other properties to some extent, but heavily adapted.
Yeah. Okay, so the other characters, and I actually don't know these ones off the top of my head, but the other characters were Nightshade, who became Silk Spectre in this, Peacemaker, who became the Comedian, and Thunderbolt, who became Ozymandias in this. I don't know who those 3 are off the top of my head, not nearly as well as Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, and The Question.
I think Peacemaker has a TV show now.
Is that the same Peacemaker?
John Cena. I don't know, but there is a Peacemaker.
All right, cool. Yeah.
That's also the name of a gun. Although I want to say, maybe this is just the movie, but I want to say that like in the original League of Heroes, there's also a Peacemaker in the in Watchmen.
Let me see here. If I just pull up a picture of him, and okay, yeah, no, it's the same. I think it's the same one. Yeah. It looks that they look very similar, not identical, but that's your comic book adaptations.
No one could have captured John Cena's brilliance at that time. They hadn't been exposed to the modern incarnation of John Cena.
Fair enough. I forgot where we were originally going with the Charlton. Oh right, I was looking up the release date of the comic, so we're still.
So it sounds like the original run of Watchmen started in. Hang on. The original run of Watchmen started.
The ideas first came about in '83, by the sounds of it.
Okay, gotcha. And it was published as an actual whole ass book in '86.
Yeah.
So I wasn't wrong.
Well, the full series was released in '86. I think the first issue was released in '85.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Which is just to say, I wasn't wrong. Watchmen happening in real time.
First appeared in the 1985 issue of DC Spotlight. And eventually published as a 12-issue series that was released from 86 to 87. So it first appeared in 85 as kind of one comic of a collection by the sounds of it. Though I'll look in the DC Spotlight, and if I have more to say about that, I will say it in the next episode.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it was released as part of a collection. And then that collection was popular, so Moore wrote the rest of it. Yeah. So the 85, I don't know. I want to see, because I'm curious how close it is to even the October 12th date,
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
We could be approaching a War of the Worlds situation where someone reads that there were a nuke went off in New York and in Watchmen. They're like, damn, I can't believe that happened in New York. Big ass squid alien.
right. Yeah, I'm not finding anything. We'll get back. We'll
Yeah.
double back to that if we need to. I mean, we covered two
So
other pages
I
technically before this one, so
yeah, I'm gonna make the strong argument that the second panel doesn't matter. You could cut it out of the book and you lose
I have
nothing.
a thing to say about the
Um,
second panel, but we have
really?
not
Okay.
finished the first panel.
Oh, okay, yeah. I
because
was gonna try to press to the third panel, but you go ahead.
because we didn't actually talk about what Rorschach's journal entry actually says in this panel.
Yeah, well, okay, fair enough.
What you think that I was not serious about one page at a time, taking as long as it takes?
No, 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 no. I'm 100% behind. I don't tempt me. But like, I don't know. I feel like I've said everything there is to say. There's a dead dog.
But the
The
dead
city is
dog.
afraid of me because I represent
But
self-knowledge.
the dead dog is something Rorschach sees that turns him into the fucked up version of Rorschach. Not this specific dead dog, by the sounds of it, but it's still
I see.
like
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
that's
Like the dogs are symbolically important to
mm-hmm.
Rorschach.
Like this is like I don't think there's really much else to say about it other than like
Mm.
it. I think it
Hey,
makes
hey. There's a theme here. There's a theme here.
yeah.
Anytime I see a fucking clock in this, anytime you have me on,
Mm-hmm.
I am going to bring up a clock if there's one on the
Mm-hmm.
panel.
Oh, I have a
That,
segment planned, but that segment unfortunately won't happen until like episode 6. So,
yeah,
but yeah, I think it really doesn't do much other than to like enhance the moment where Rorschach sees a dead dog in the like
yeah,
Rorschach
and
plot that he
yeah,
takes later.
hmm
Um,
hmm
because it's like if you were really thinking about it, if you were really into it, you see that and you're like, oh shit, like
yeah. If you were the type of person to do a one page at a time
yeah,
analysis,
you can be like, holy shit, it's the dog.
incidentally, yeah.
Um,
Incidentally, fun producer's note here.
mhm,
I actually have two separate posters
mhm.
involving like supernatural dogs hanging in my room as we speak.
Mm.
Um, so I get it, man.
Right. And then just to take the actors analysis, I can see how that transitions from dead dog leads to that thought of like city is afraid
Mm-hmm.
of me. I've seen its true face because that's
Yeah,
what he feel. The city is afraid of him is just something he feels in his general day to day like
yeah,
interacting with the underworld.
yeah,
But the seeing its true face is like he's remembering that he saw that the
yeah,
events
yeah.
from when he first saw that dead dog,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it's led him down that path.
Yeah.
I think that I'm done with this first page now. Oh,
Panel,
first
panel.
panel,
Hang
yeah,
on.
first panel. We're not.
We're committing whole
we're not
hog,
done.
Poppy.
You're right. So picture wise, this is really more of a second and third panel for this one. Um, but I find it interesting that the first words we hear from Rorschach in this book are from Rorschach, and technically, the first character we see in this book is also Rorschach. You just don't know it's
Ooh.
Rorschach yet.
Uh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're talking about panel 3. And
It's
technically
mostly
panel
panel
2.
2, but his feet are visible in panel 2.
Yeah,
So,
because I was gonna the fucking the hogs.
mm-hmm.
But okay, so yeah, because I was gonna say it's like no, you see the comedian first, but no, no, you're right.
Yeah.
Um, I have something to say about panel 3,
Mm-hmm.
but really quickly on panel 2.
Mm-hmm.
For context, I am a paramedic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I really wonder what experience Alan Moore has with someone who is manic or schizophrenic or any similar disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Because this second the second piece of the monologue
Mm-hmm.
actually does really remind me of a lot of patients I've had who've had similar disorders.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's that sort of like running train of thought where things are not necessarily connected. It's word association.
And by just to be clear, by second piece you mean like the second row, right?
The streets are extended gutters, and the gutters
gotcha,
are full of blood. And when the drains finally scab over, all the vermin will drown. It's like there is a train of thought there, but it's kind of rickety and bouncing off the walls. And like it's also to be fair, it's also a very classic way to portray mental illness, which I would argue, like Alan Moore leans into with Rorschach. But it's also something that like I have actually seen in real life, where you have someone who is having this sort of like manic thing, and like the thoughts going through their head are so loud, so to speak, that they kind of like associate with the last word in each sentence to start like a new sentence without pausing to take a breath. Any other thought? Oh, go ahead.
I'll finish this panel out, and then I'll go with a new, broader thought that I want to talk about here. But in regards to the text here, I mean, I am struggling to find something deeper other than just like, haha, streets are extended gutters and the gutters are full of blood. Look, blood's going into the gutters. Which, you know, with the knowledge of like this is Rorschach right now, seeing this right now, there's a chance, and again, I guess this is more of an actor's analysis than anything. There's a chance that he's in this moment, like he's thinking about this specific moment when he's writing the journal entry of him walking over the comedian's blood through the gutters.
So that brings an interesting question, if you want to do that, which is the comedian the dead dog? I would argue that's not how we're intended to interpret this, but I am neither God nor Alan Moore, so I do not have the correct opinion.
But I think that's something that, at least when reading this like first set of panels, like something that might be popping into your head here. If he's talking about the blood that he's walking over now, then the dog might be something related to the comedian. Dog, I mean, you know what? Actually, taking that, I can say something that sounds like what an English professor might say about like something in the book. In the same way that the dead dog symbolizes Rorschach's like death of innocence, we'll call it, even though he wasn't. You know, that was not the. That was the final nail, not. But
right.
If that dog represents his death of innocence, the comedian's death represents the death of innocence of this story. Like this is when like this is like, at least in the context of the story, this is the first thing that like, from the viewer's perspective, not even in the context of the story, from the viewer's perspective, this is the first thing that starts off all this like fucked up things that are about to happen.
Yeah, because I think you really can read Watchmen as a eulogy for the comedian. One of my favorite concepts in media, I'm not going to say it's my favorite book, but one of my favorite concepts in media is The Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card. And like I think this really takes it takes a similar route where it's like let's sum up this person's life very honestly and not uncompassionately, but like let's be direct about this. The comedian was a rapist. Let's also be direct about this. The comedian was right about a lot of things decades before anyone else realized it, including the smartest man in the room and the most insane man in the room, Manhattan and Rorschach.
So chapter 2, on my latest like consumption of chapter 2, I had realized like maybe I've realized this before, but like this is when it became explicit of like chapter 2 is just a bunch of different flashbacks to what I feel, and we'll probably get into it later, are some of the most impactful moments in each of the other main characters' lives. Like every single, and all of them involve the comedian.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, maybe they're just thinking about him because they're at a funeral, but also, why are they at a funeral in the first place? Why did the author put them at a funeral in the first place?
Yeah. Like,
Like,
it turns out we could have had female space marines whenever we wanted. It's a media property, but also like, yeah,
there's some significance there. I do believe that it's like, they're all very significant.
it's an intentional choice.
Ozymandias admits himself that that's like the most significant moment. That's like a pivotal moment in his life.
Yeah. We'll get to Ozzy.
We will get to Ozzy. We will get to
gonna...
Ozzy in about 20 pages.
But I'm gonna cut you off a little bit here for panel 3. I'm gonna swerve a little bit.
Yeah. We can move
because
to panel 3.
While this is Kovacs, I do not believe this is Rorschach, which is a hyperbolic way of saying. I think one of the things that's really interesting that we do with Rorschach as a broader character, and Watchmen in general, is that there are characters always on the screen, but they're not always presenting as those characters, and you don't recognize them as those characters. And so, like, here we have a ginger man in a green suit carrying a doomsday sign, and if you're familiar with Watchmen, you know, that's Rorschach.
Yeah.
But like I would argue that that's not something the first time reader is going to know, and B,
no, absolutely not. Yeah.
I would also argue that that's not something that I don't know if Rorschach would describe it that way.
I don't even think that's something a second time reader would be able to pick up right away.
Yeah.
Like, because you don't. The end is nigh guy, you don't see again after Rorschach gets captured. Like, he is out of the book. So, like, maybe you pick it up on your second reading, but if you're like me and the high schooler who read this, you didn't. Right. You didn't realize that was Rorschach.
Yeah. And I would go further and make the psychological argument that there's the whole, like, give me back my face bit.
Yeah.
That the Doomsayer and Rorschach are separate identities, even if they're co-aware of each other.
There is a reason when I did the summary that I said we can see Kovacs, not we can see Rorschach. Because I 100% agree with you. Rorschach does not conceptualize himself as Kovacs, aside from when he's in... Rorschach and Kovacs are two different people. And he says it himself, that dog was the night that Walter Kovacs became Rorschach.
Yeah, and I think that's worth calling out here. Interesting insight into Kovacs. He's walking through the blood. I would argue that if you look at the panel closely, the fella in the apron is looking at Kovacs and going like, hey, dude, you're walking through blood. And then realizing like, oh, he's one of these guys with the fucking signs.
I think he's looking at him and realizing that's where the smell is coming from.
Interesting.
That's a joke. I don't think that's the full analysis, but canonically smelly. That is the best character trait to give anyone. Canonically smells.
We're just writing 101. Engage all 5 senses. Anytime that this character is on screen, I want you to imagine a man that hasn't showered for. I want you to imagine a Smash convention.
I want you to imagine a man that has eaten nothing but cold beans and sugar cubes. And imagine what it must smell like when he talks to you.
It all makes sense now. Rorschach's a horse in a human form.
And 2 riders were approaching.
Yeah.
Which I feel like I gotta pull it up because we should probably just keep in mind the actual title of the chapter, which is At Midnight All the Agents.
I did not know that either.
Don't know how that relates to anything here. I just kind of wanted to remind myself what the title was, which every title is part of a quote that they show the full quote at the end.
I have 2 questions for the superfan.
Mm-hmm.
Do we see Hoseman again?
I've never looked for Hoseman again. I think we might. We'll keep an eye out for him when we're doing the city streets scenes.
Add him to the character tracker.
Add him to the character tracker. We'll create a document. Editor, make a note here. Add a new list of like characters to keep track of, and we'll see if anyone else ever gets added to it.
For the corkboard segment with all the strings. Hoseman, what does he know?
We will prove how Hoseman connects everything for Watchmen.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty interesting because Hoseman does not appear in this run of Watchmen again, but he does appear in New 52. But second one, Bombi.
Mm-hmm. Are
you a fan of Bob Dylan?
I am not. I am not.
Fake fan.
Like, I am fake fan. I had tried, like, when I was first, like, really starting to do analysis on this book, I did look up, like, more about these quotes, the full text of whatever it is, and consumed it. But Bob Dylan, I honestly can't even remember how this particular, like, song or poem or whatever it is that he wrote, because I don't like Bob Dylan. I don't like his music.
I've recently been told that I need to embrace my 60s hippie side.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe I'm going to be a Bob Dylan fan by the time we get to page 20.
Mm-hmm.
But as it is, I have no idea what Midnight All the Agents, except hey guys, the Doomsday Clock.
Mm-hmm.
I've done all analysis possible.
I will pull us to the quote, because the full quote does relate to it being about Watchmen here. Skipping to the end of the book, the quote that shows at the end is, "At midnight, all the agents and superhuman crew go out and round up everyone who knows more than they do." So that's the full quote for this one. And the full quote matters. I mean, like, there are definitely moments where the chapter is like, just like the title of the chapter is just as impactful as the full quote. But I feel like for this chapter particularly, the real title, or at least the thing thematically to keep in mind for this one, is
the real title is quote. Hey, look, a Bob Dylan quote.
Yeah, the full Bob Dylan quote, or at least the full one that was quoted. Back to panel 3. So
the end is nigh.
And like,
so true, bestie.
What a classic move for like a seminal piece of fiction to open with essentially a shot of two normal ass people. At least in this moment,
the average Americans.
Right.
I don't vote, and the only good man was my dad and President Truman.
But so the end is nigh, which, I mean, I feel like it doesn't mean much to most people at this point in the book, Yeah. Especially since, like, I mean, the Cold War is still definitely going on, and I almost guarantee I did not live in the 80s, contrary to the allegations. But I'm sure there were still, like, plenty of people walking around with end is nigh signs. As long as the Cold War was a threat, the end is nigh was a sign that you would see.
I don't know if... Okay, so there's a big difference between... Here we go. There's a big difference between Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines and Watchmen, which is that Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines was made well after the Cold War. But what I'm trying to get to is, I feel like the end is nigh, the Doomsayer type, is like a classic piece of atmosphere for that particular time in America.
Yeah.
And the end is nigh is like the most iconic version of that character.
Yeah.
It's that and Repent, I think.
Repent. Which, I mean, nowadays I don't see an end is nigh sign anywhere, but I do see plenty of Repent.
Yeah.
But yeah. As far as the text itself, which I also just want to say this because I'm seeing this now. Like you can still technically see the comedian's badge. In fact, you can even see it in panel 4. Um, I just think that's neat.
Yeah.
Um,
Certified. What's his name again? Gibbons moment.
Gibbons moment, right?
Yeah.
All right. So let's look at the text here again. Let's see. The accumulated filth of all their sex and murder will foam up about their waists, and all the whores and politicians will look up and shout, "Save us!" And I'll look down and whisper, "No."
Fun fact.
Mm-hmm.
Linguistically speaking, politicians are being associated with murder. This is a Vietnam comic. Okay. Analysis done.
All right. Yeah. You know what? You're right. Also, look down and whisper no. Page ends with a guy looking down. He doesn't whisper no, but
yeah.
You know.
Kovacs. Interestingly enough, this is Kovacs doing stolen valor for being tall. Because I'm pretty sure that man is 5'1", and he's not looking down on any politicians. All right, any politician worth his salt is going to be at least in 2-inch risers.
Yeah, I want to say there's something else here aside from that, but that is very fair. Politicians associated with murder. Because I'm caught up in the imagery, or at least the textual imagery of Rorschach looking down on the masses, essentially.
Yeah.
The masses who are writhing
average
in the blood filth that he described earlier.
I'm on the verge of a personal breakthrough. Am I going to talk down about Redditors? Not tonight. So like Kovacs has this psychology, right, of looking down on everyone else for being these like horrible, immoral, like narrow-minded people, while also very much being horrible, immoral, and narrow-minded.
Literally black and white morality is what he claims to believe in. We'll get into that.
We'll get into that. Put it on the
corkboard. That's the catchphrase of the series.
But point being, like I bring it up because I bring it up because I think it's an interesting thing to keep in mind as you go forward with it, especially the Rorschach's journal entries. That Rorschach thinks he's better than everyone.
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. Yeah. I don't have anything else to say. Maybe it'll come back to me.
So, panel 4. They had a choice, all of them. They could have followed in the footsteps of good men like my daddy, or my political daddy. Decent men who believed in a day's work for a day's pay. Because the president can be fired if he does not do his job. So
this reveals in the lore that whatever happened, the presidents did not change, at least until after Truman. But the thing that, as we were going through the summary of this page, that was like, right, of course. He mentions he idolizes his father, but we don't really know who his father is. We only know that his mother is a confirmed whore.
True.
Like a professional whore.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's interesting that he idolizes his father like this. And it makes me want to know, like, okay, but who was his father in that case? You know,
who does he believe his father to be?
Yeah, but this is like the only bit of text we ever get about it. And you know what? No, hold on. I gotta confirm something, because there might be some other text. I have to jump ahead to a different chapter. This is the first. I was expecting something like this to happen, but this is the first time it's recorded to happen, of jumping ahead to double check something about what we're reading now. So looking through the therapist notes here, or at least therapist like monologue about him, the interesting thing that I see is that at least the only mention of his father that I see is that the father's name is unknown. So, yeah, I don't think we got anything on his dad.
Yeah.
The only other thing we got was that the mom was told by all of her peers to get an abortion,
Yeah.
and she's willing to say that to her kid. So,
Yeah. Classic Rorschach's mom moment.
classic Rorschach's mom.
So, yeah, we've got a trail of blood being left by Rorschach. That's all I really have to say about this panel beyond like classic conservative. My dad was the only good man aside from maybe Reagan.
Also, the hose is coming out of the building, which has me wondering if this is actually just a shop owner and no one's bothered to like clean up the blood, so he has to do it himself.
Yeah, the deli owner.
Yeah, which is like
okay, the deli, him being the owner of a deli is a interesting thing because delis are Jewish in origin, German Jewish particularly. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, I mean that might be something. I don't think there's anything worth digging deeper than that, but
yeah,
I think that,
Superman
something.
was Jewish. This guy is Superman. Superman confirmed.
Hose-Man, the most powerful character in Watchmen, actually.
Yeah.
Let's see the text here exactly. They had a choice, all of them. They could have followed in the footsteps of good men. Yeah, the father and President Truman. Idolizing President Truman. As far as I remember my history class and the research project that we were supposed to do in high school. Now, it was high school, so I may have not looked into it very well. But as far as I remember, most people were very like adamant about Truman. Like he wasn't like a great president or anything. You know, it's surprising to hear him say that about Truman and not like even if he wants like a Republican president. I'm trying to double check something. Truman was like was Franklin's vice president, right? Or one am I thinking of something else?
So originally I thought he was talking about FDR, in which case I was like, it's really interesting to hear Rorschach praise FDR, who is, I think a good man, but probably not something that Kovacs would think. But there's that. But I don't know anything about Truman. I'm even kind of like, I'm pretty sure this is after the U.S. stopped doing the thing where it's like, oh, the runner-up for the presidency is going to be the vice president.
No, Truman was Franklin Roosevelt, so Truman took over because Franklin died during his fourth term. Truman became president and then got reelected because that happens pretty often. I think that's only ever happened. I think that's only ever not happened like once.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. This is a Watchmen analysis, not an American political history analysis.
Yeah, right. Same thing. Honestly, same thing.
But like the notable thing about Truman was that he oversaw like the bitter end of World War II and the start of the Cold War. I'm trying. So I'm just more so like trying to be like, what is Rorschach idolizing about him specifically? Because like, let me see here. Let me see Truman social policies. He might have started the Red Scare.
That would make sense. I'm gonna be real with you. You're flying solo on this one. I
that's fair, and I am fully expecting to fly solo on future episodes as well when you're not here. There's a good chance that depending on who we get,
Yeah.
Let me see here. Let's see. Expanded New Deal programs. It's interesting that Rorschach idolizes Truman. I have an idea, actually. Let me cross-reference some stuff with the lore of the book. I need to double-check what specific years Truman was president. 45 through 53. When did John become Dr. Manhattan? Let's find out.
Like they used to say on my favorite show.
Hollywood stars and celebrities. Cold War stars and celebrities.
Cold War stars and celebrities.
What do they
What do they know?
Let's find out. Okay, hold on. Let's see here.
For anyone who's wondering, this is incidentally also a BoJack Horseman podcast, no matter what we do.
Right. Okay, I think this would have been after Truman's presidency ended. Based on some stuff with it, it looks like at the very least, let me see here. It's very much implied that he's been at least having sex with his first lover in 59, which would be past Truman's presidency. And I don't think the implication seems to be that like presidents don't change until after Vietnam. The existence of vigilantes in the 30s was not enough to get to change political history, aside from the Keene Act, maybe. But even the Keene Act was more. We'll get into it.
We'll get into it. Add that to the tracker.
But yeah, what is it about Truman, man? What is it about Truman? True man. Maybe that's what it is.
I'm just gonna let that one slide. I'm not being honest with you.
No, it's bugging me. It is really bugging me. It bugs me with the Truman thing, but I think having read a bit more about like what his social policies were, because he did something that he called the Fair Deal, which funny sequel name with that.
Yeah, right.
But it was really just an expansion on his stuff, and reading it's like housing funding for public housing, expansion for civil rights, saying that now the desegregating the armed forces is what Google says here. Just a bunch of federal aid to things that are generally agreed to help the poor and the needy. I think what it does is it portrays something that we've neglected to mention about Rorschach, or maybe just forgot about, and that I think he does give a shit about people like that.
Oh yeah, like the funny thing is like, as much as I'm like sort of like making fun of Rorschach and saying that like he's this like horrible conservative, the fact of the matter is, both, you know, quote unquote, those people, but also conservatives do actually care. It's just that the way that they show that is by murdering people.
Yeah.
And
in
that's
that way,
ineffective for their stated goals.
Rorschach is a true-blooded American. Okay, I think I'm good with panel 4. Let's do panel 5. We're very zoomed out now at this point. You can't make out anyone. You can see
panel 5,
trucks.
still the trail of blood. I had a thought about panel 5 I want to voice.
Yes.
Which is that I'm like 90% certain that is supposed to be a Vite Industries truck.
I see it. You asked me like what was a logo for Vite Industries, and now I see what you're referring to. I am fairly certain that is the logo for his company Pyramid Deliveries, which is the company that was found. It's like the first like thing that the thread leads to when they first start piecing together the mass killer stuff.
Yeah.
But yes, and it's a Vite Industries thing. Vite's everywhere. Vite is everywhere, but like here's the thing too. On the recent reviewing, I say viewing because the last thing I saw was a motion comic again, but on the recent reread, the Vite, I found it interesting that Ozymandias actually, as a person, doesn't actually have that much of a presence in the book. There are other minor characters that have more time dedicated to them, actually. You could argue that I think even like the main character of the comic within the comic has more screen time than Vite.
Veidt definitely falls into that odd category of characters who Veidt definitely falls into that odd category of characters who have a huge presence in the narrative, are a symptom of the setting rather than a cause of it in a lot of cases.
Mm.
Um, and so like the amount of screen, and on top of that, they are so intelligent that anytime you see them on screen, something has already gone wrong.
That's fair.
This is something that I think a lot about with villain factions in Warhammer. That like if you see, like, just to call the most obvious one, Dark Eldar, something has already gone wrong, because if this was a real place, 99% of all stories involving Dark Eldar would be, yeah, no one knew what was going on until it was already too late, and that would be the entire story.
He does match, like, in taken as a narrative, he does look very similar to that, like, classic narrative role in, like, an action series of the real big bad.
Yeah.
The guy in the chair that's plotting while the nemesis is just being a fucking goof, you know?
Yeah. He's definitely the, like, Sidious of the situation.
Yeah, he does. He's got that kind of, like, level about him. Just kind of as a narrative thing. But beyond that, just talking about, like, the pyramid deliveries truck here, even outside of his physical presence, he is everywhere in here. You can see, like, bottles of nostalgia all throughout, like, every chapter. You can see, like, different, like, ads featuring him, or just things mentioning some company that Ozymandias knows or owns.
Yeah, to use the to use the Tumblr meme haunts the narrative.
Yeah, actually. He is definitely there. Let's look at the text on this page here. Instead, they followed the droppings of lechers and communists and didn't realize that the trail led over a precipice until it was too late. Don't tell me they didn't have a choice.
It's probably, I don't know Alan Moore's personal politics, but it's probably worth considering. It's probably worth considering the difference between communism and, like, FDR's New Dealism, and, like, actual contemporary conservatism. Because, like, I kind of feel like Rorschach would be a McCarthyist, in that he is so concerned about the threat of communism that he would be willing to, Patriot Act his way into all sorts of atrocities, in order to achieve that goal. But kind of like you said, like, he does also care about, quote unquote, the people.
I think it goes into something where it's like, because I think he knows that, like, things were good when Truman was president, because of being, like, because it was the New Dealism policies and things were good then. But now it's the 80s. In fact, I think that the dog thing happened probably in, like, the early 80s. Around when the Keene Act happened, so late 70s, early 80s. So we are well into, like, Cold War era America. And a lot of the symptoms were caused by the presidents of the time in that era. A lot of the things that a lot of the dissatisfaction with America was caused by, like, McCarthyism and Red Scare and shit like that. Wanting to move away from welfare because that's communist, it's just that I'm sure for him and even well-meaning people at that time, you didn't really question Nixon before Watergate. You were like, that's the president. That was the rightfully elected president. A lot of people are, like, believe he's the guy for office. He's not obvious. There's nothing obviously wrong with him, He's talking about fighting commies, which we are all scared of. No one's
and I guess
to point
the thing
to
that I'm probably
being the
trying to
problem.
say is that I think that you should probably interpret communists in this context as authoritarians, rather than like the more modern take on communism of like, people who are in the DSA.
Mm-hmm. And there's something that's getting me with the imagery of this too, because he's saying trail it over a precipice, and just the deep black of the street there, and that void there, and there's something there. I've definitely taken my time with analysis on this. I have never gotten this deep into spending a full hour talking about a page. So this is not something that I have fully registered yet. But I find it interesting that, like, it's the precipice and there's a Vite vehicle in there.
Yeah, in the precipice, in the abyss.
Which, with the framing too, it's kind of the other end of the abyss, which can relate to like how Vite did save the world at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Which we'll get into that.
Yeah, right. Vite did nothing wrong. Right.
Vite did nothing. We will have that debate when it comes time. Did Vite do something wrong? We will see. But maybe we'll come back to it later on in this episode. But I think I'm done with panel 5 for now.
Gotcha.
Panel 6.
Panel 6. Liberals.
Yes.
I made an assumption earlier where I related smooth talkers to evangelicals, and I don't think that's televangelists, and I don't think that's wrong.
I don't think that's who Rorschach's talking about.
But I also don't think that's like meant to be that specific.
Yeah, I think he's talking about like politicians, celebrities, people people on TV who have amassed a following. Like your Dr. Oz's of the time or whatever, I think he might be talking about people like that, salesmen and things like that. The whole world stands on the brink, staring down bloody hell. All those liberals and intellectuals and smooth talkers, and all of a sudden nobody can think of anything to say. So we do have a hand there. So we do have the classic like narration talking about something else, describe something in the picture as implying that this guy is like the whole world staring down into hell,
and can barely even see what's going on.
And hell being associated now with the city streets, which, based on Rorschach's description and also based on just how things are about to be after Dr. Manhattan leaves, it's not wrong. It's not an inaccurate description of the state of affairs at this point in time. And I think that's really just the interesting thing with this specific panel. That it's just like this really is like the detective staring down at what is hell, and the detective in this case being like as like your
it's
first
quite a drop.
Real like character with spoken dialogue being the representation of the world is more like your introduction to the world.
He's the everyman.
Yeah. In especially in that context of like I want to put this into the context of this is new for its time. This comic was new for its time.
Yeah. And it's not exactly easing you into it, but it is like kind of like, okay, here's where we're going to be. Let's take a step back.
Yeah, and I think, the nobody has anything to say. That might even be something about the comics industry at large, That now we are able to talk about heavy topics like this, and no one has. Or at least this hasn't gotten popular. No one... Things fucking suck. Like, this came out in the 80s. This came out at the time that he's describing. It's worse than the book, but it still wasn't great.
Yeah, it's hyperbolic. It's not incorrect.
Yeah, and we're looking at things that are not in the good state, and nobody in the comics industry, according to Alan Moore's opinion in writing this,
Yeah.
has nothing to say.
And as we all know, Alan Moore is correct about absolutely everything ever.
Yes, of course.
Um, Alan Moore has never regretted anything he's ever said because he is objectively correct whenever he speaks.
Right.
And he would appreciate me saying that, I'm sure.
Of course. Yeah, no, that is that Alan Moore would very much appreciate you saying that he is always right.
Yeah.
There is also just as much a chance that he disagrees with it on the principle of he likes to disagree with things.
Yeah, right. Known contrarian Alan Moore.
Right. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't really think there's too much else here with this panel. The framing is something almost came to mind with the framing of it, where taken with the previous panel, you can almost see it as one picture, but it's not quite there. I'm not super confident.
Interestingly enough, looking really closely at the pinky, this is not the this is an entirely separate image from panel 9 or panel 7, I guess.
Oh yeah. There's motion with it. That's him
Mm-hmm.
grabbing the edge in panel 6, and then you can see his grip tighten up in panel 7. So he's properly leaning over now. Yeah, that's a nice little subtle catch there. Yeah.
And I'm just gonna put it out there. We've got some good art theory stuff going on with the
lines. I think
the lines.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say here. That we got some nice little lines with this. That they're all pointing the same way. You can almost line up panel 5's curb to the curb in panel 1. It's you can actually do it in panel 6 to panel 2.
Yeah,
That's some that just goes with the nice art direction on that. The top of the hole in the window on panel 7 lines up with the curb in panel 6. The curb nearly lines up in panel 7 with the curb on panel 4. It is definitely visually appealing.
Yeah, that's classic Gibbons moment.
That adds to just the page as a whole. The page as a whole just looks good because of that. It makes it look like it, and it's God. It goes with that the thing everyone says about the book, where Dr. Manhattan's perspective of time is conveyed to the viewer through consuming the book itself.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to just take in this page of this linear progression of events. People are moving in there from panel to panel, and just take it as a whole picture here. You can see everything at once very easily, and the art direction definitely helps with that, with the lines. Because you can see like the streets almost melded into panel 4, making it look like it's just the intersection continuing, you know?
Yeah.
Like the street in panel 6. Oh my God, the street in panel 6 lines up with panel 7 so well that it looks like it's just a continued window break.
Yeah.
Like it's good.
And the thing is that we're talking about like exactness here, but you don't actually need to be that exact with art. Where all you need to do is give the impression that it lines up, and it does so often. That I kind of didn't cotton on to it until you said it just now, but everything looks like it's flowing together. And even though there are these, panel breaks, it looks like a single continuous image. Where if you just shrank those down, it feels almost like it would just flow together.
And this is, I am sure we will see similar images like this as well.
Mm-hmm.
There is just a frame. It's honestly so even when it's just like the pages are a single scene, like taking the page as a whole makes that single scene look like it portrays. It's almost like it's a wide shot, you know.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I just flipped ahead to a random page here with like Dan and Lori in the restaurant at the end of the chapter here,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at that page, you can see that like this all takes place in the restaurant. There's clearly movement. Like it opens on a wide shot. The first panel is a proper wide shot, and then like a zoom in of like dinner, different people eating there, and then like the bottom half is them leaving the restaurant, talking on the courtyard. But you look at that page, just you soften your eyes. You don't look too closely at the text, and it
Yeah.
just looks like a scene. You know, like it just
Mm-hmm.
the page itself looks like a wide shot, and it's something that even that you can see in even page one here.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Mm-hmm.
little harder to see when they intercut flashbacks within the page, but also keeping the current thing going. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little
Mm-hmm.
harder to see in that case, but I have a feeling it's going to be like a constant, especially with the strong association with the uh, the Doctor Manhattan's perspective on it. Like that is something everyone picks up on in this book for a
Mm-hmm.
reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Also, flipping it over here, because we're kind of talking about panel 7 at this point, I want to
Yeah. Yeah.
say you flip the page and you get a panel in the exact same shape of Blake getting thrown out the window.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like that is some incredible like planning on that.
And depending on who you are, that's where your eyes are going to be resting
Yeah,
when you flip the page.
like that is, and this is not the first time it happens, but man, it goes a long way, and it's something that went a long way in making me really appreciate the artistry of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
God, I'm even flipping ahead, and I'm like, oh God, I see so much more to talk about with some of these. It's God, the book is so good, man.
Oh yeah.
If you're
Oh yeah. I
listening to
mean,
this and
there's
you
a
have
reason we're
not
here.
read the book, and you are being made interested by us talking about it, go and read the book.
Oh
Like,
yeah. I mean,
not even
I think
to
the first time I
understand the
read this,
podcast.
I think the first time I read this, I found it through entirely legitimate sources online,
Hmm.
um, and it wasn't any worse
Hmm.
um,
Yeah, like
for being on whatever
yeah,
chain
like
place I
you
found it.
bootleg it, whatever. But like, don't watch the movie and assume you got it. Don't even
Yeah.
watch the motion comic and assume you get it. The
Mm-hmm.
motion comic's closer to it than the movie, but
Just by virtue of being the comic,
right.
but
But like, read the comic. There is some next level stuff with it that I have not seen anything really come close to it.
mm-hmm.
It is truly incredible. And like I said, if you're listening to this, and even if you don't listen to another episode, read the book. It is just so good. Um. Anyway, panel 7, right?
Yeah, panel 7. Another little art note. We were talking earlier about how small the blood stain is
Mm-hmm.
at the bottom of 7. Well, in the middle of 7, and 1, it's in the middle of the panel.
Yeah.
Rule of thirds, whatever. It's in the middle of the panel.
Yeah. I mean, rule of
Um,
thirds, it goes right on an intersection.
and on top of that, you've got the tracing lines down for the windows for the apartment complex, I assume.
Oh, they focus you
Um,
into that spot. Yeah.
and then you've got the little hose that leads your eyes there. You've
Yeah.
also got the Vite truck pulling away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm looking at the like little black silhouettes of people on the road, and there is like a very noticeable gap around the dead body.
Yeah.
And finally, if you look in the very bottom of the center, there is a car which I'm like 90% certain the roof says PD on it.
Mm-hmm.
Which it sounds obvious saying it out loud to me at least, but that's the
Mm-hmm.
police department.
Yeah, that one's more of a like, oh hey, look, the attention to detail, that feels like
Yeah.
in like a play when a director's like, hey, wouldn't this exist here if we
Yeah.
have police here? Wouldn't you be
Yeah.
able to see the police car from this perspective? And
Yeah.
and that's the kind of thing that makes you really appreciate most works. But when
Hmm.
you really go into it and realize that like not a single like line is wasted in this book,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's something very insignificant.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah,
They did it for us,
right,
to use the classic phrasing.
right. But yeah, we already talked a bit about his quite a drop line. Uh,
Yeah.
we talked a bit about him balding, and just said that he's balding.
Bald.
Bald,
Um,
bald, bald.
I'm I'm actually gonna put it out there
Mm-hmm.
that I do really think that like we're starting in with a here is what you are going to get by the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Look, um, but I also think that zooming out to the detective, who in this case is the everyman, and like it's very classic to use a detective as a port in to okay, let's understand these characters, let's understand these stories
Yeah, let's
as a
get to the
perspective
story here.
character.
Yeah.
And
Oh, and you
so,
can see a little bit of blood in the inside of the building too, where the
oh
detective's
yeah,
standing. Huh, neat. Oh, there was a general note about the book overall
hmm
that I'm remembering just from reading that that's quite a drop line. Rorschach speaks in a monotone because all the other characters that aren't Rorschach or Dr. Manhattan, and even Dr. Manhattan will have like the emphasis sometimes, but
yeah,
like the choice to make Rorschach speak monotone, like he does not highlight, there is not a single like highlight in his line. We can't see it here because it's narration, you know.
hmm hmm
It's writing. Most other comic book writers don't really like bold stuff that is canonically like writings.
hmm
Um, but even when he talks normally, like he never emphasizes a word.
hmm
Like
hmm
he speaks very plainly. Or not plainly, but it's all monotone. And I think it's meant more to be like he's really like stuck in his own world of like investigation and journal writing.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. He speaks like someone writes,
yeah,
to put it in a funny way.
he speaks like a way the detective writes, cutting out
Hmm
any
hmm
sort of like does and things that aren't needed. He doesn't
Yeah,
say I saw a dog carcass in an
yeah.
alley. He doesn't say
He could probably
in
do this
an
entire
alley,
analysis in only 45 minutes.
right? But he says like he just says it like you know what I'm saying at this point. Like
Yeah.
he's writing it like notes. You know.
Something I'm gonna just put out there really quick.
Mm-hmm.
I forget when this was the case and to what degree this was a case. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna bring it to the super fan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you are making a comic,
Mm-hmm.
my understanding is that there is a limited number of colors that you can use. Um, because that's just what the printer has in it, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And the printer isn't good at mixing colors. This is the reason for the sort of classic comic style with the dots,
Mm-hmm.
because by putting different dots of different colors, you can trick the eye into seeing mixes, even though the individual dots are not mixed.
That
I
is.
don't know if that was the case for Watchmen in the original publication or in the digital remaster, which is what we're looking at now.
That's a good question actually. Did the dots exist in the original publication?
But
Ooh.
the and I kind of doubt it because of the hatching on a
Mm,
lot of the
mm,
art. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because limited color palettes are going to be a part of comic art at this time. Because even if it wasn't a part of this comic, it's a part of Gibbon's background. And so I want to pay really close attention to if there's a truck that's white purple, it was a choice to make that truck white purple. if there's something like 5 or 6 cars that are
Ah,
Kovacs
and
green, that's intentional.
that's the only like purple car there. I don't know so much about the other colors. I'm not
Um,
convinced, but
and like I don't think that it's like, oh yeah, Kovacs has 5 cars that are
yeah,
circling the fight car, but
but
like I think it's notable
Vite
that
definitely has the only purple car, which is
yeah. Um, but it's good to like look at the panel and see is like, okay, you've got a couple of like comedian yellow, um, and like I should probably be clear. I say comedian yellow in the same way that like Warhammer has like Druchii purple or something like that. Or I'm not saying that everything that is this color is related. I'm just saying like, yeah, there's a limited color palette here, so pay attention to the use of color because it's even more meaningful than in most normal art.
yeah, yeah. The color choice in this book overall is definitely very like strong. I mean, the sidewalks
Yeah.
are purple.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to see when Ben Bay dots, which is what they're called, I just found
Hmm.
out were no longer being used.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and it looks like everything I'm reading seems to point around the 60s to 70s.
Yeah.
So,
Which
yeah.
I'm assuming that this isn't Gibbons' first comic.
Mm-hmm.
So like I assume that that was part of Gibbons' background.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows? Dave Gibbons, if you're listening, please tell me what your favorite type
Right.
of monkey is. Um,
Yeah,
there you
I'm
go.
trying to like pull up like an original image to see if maybe you can tell if they're using the dots in that. But the most you can tell is it's just not as crisp as the release we have, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, the yeah. I don't know. Any thoughts? Any other thoughts about this page here? Any other layers you want to take it at?
There's a little one in the corner.
There's a one in the corner. There is a one in the corner.
Or I'm pretty sure that's just a page marker, but we're going
Mm-hmm.
to have to pay attention to that. Because there are comics within comics, there are printings within the comic, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they have the page numbering in the corner, so it's going to be
Oh
interesting to
yeah,
track that.
I don't think
Add
they
that to the
do.
tracker.
Yeah, add that to the tracker. All right, page number. We have the characters to watch for
Yeah,
Postman and page number.
yeah.
All right. So I think that is all I have to say about this page. You don't have any other final notes on this, do you?
No,
No.
no. I'm actually really happy with how that turned out.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So, this has been Watchmen one page at a time. Once again, my name is Bobby. You can follow me on socials on Twitter. Well, we'll see how long Twitter lasts, but
Yeah.
Blue Sky, Twitch, and YouTube at Jikimny. That is Jikmnhy. You don't have to pronounce it like I did. You can pronounce it any way you want. And do you have anything to plug, Nick?
Yeah, so I live under a rock, do not have socials whatsoever. If you want to make me happy, go find probably Jacob's Deep Weird podcast. And the next time Bobby is streaming Final Fantasy, go ahead and just go in the chat and type Wunk Lamont, and it will summon me, the same way that saying Bloody Mary a couple times in the mirror will summon Margaret Thatcher.
All right.